Okay, so today we're going to look at the Embargo Act of 1807 and why that was necessary and really what that is. Okay, so by 1803, Britain is back at war with France. France is under the command of Napoleon, and they're at war again. And so, just as before, Britain does not want the United States or other countries trading with France, and so American ships that are headed to France are attacked. And Britain is basically what is happening is Britain is waging a commercial war on American shipping, blocking American shipping, not just from France, but pretty much any European port. As a matter of fact, Britain has actually passed a law saying all American ships have to come to Britain first, pay a tax, and then you can go to these other ports in Europe. Only after you've come to Britain and paid a tax first. And of course that's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. And then not only that, French began seizing American ships as well. American ships that are going to Britain and going to Britain to pay that tax or just going to Britain to trade. They begin seizing American ships. They're just not nearly as good at it because they have a smaller navy, and their navy is busy fighting the wars of Napoleon's wars. The British take it a step further, though, and the step further is called impressment. And let me explain kind of what life is like in the Navy for the British Navy and why they felt like they could do this act of impressment. So life in the British Navy is very hard, especially if you're just kind of at the very lowest level. You have to do whatever you're told. If you disobey, if you fall asleep, you can be beaten severely. And so life on a British Navy vessel is hard. And any British subject, in other words, what we would call any American citizen, any British subject could be pressed or forced into service. And this is where we get the idea of impressment. So all British subjects were subject to, the service in the Royal Navy. The British Navy at this time has over 650 vessels, maybe over 1,000 vessels during this period. And so they've got a huge navy, which means they need lots of sailors. And when they're at war, they need even more. And so that there's a high need for sailors all the time. Not only that, because life is so hard on these ships, people aren't quick to sign up for it. And if you're forced into that service and your ship that you're on goes into some port somewhere in the world and you've got a chance to escape, you'll take that opportunity. And so British sailors would desert when they come into these foreign ports, and they know how to sail, so the quickest thing, easiest way for them to escape being found is to find work on other sailing vessels, commercial ships and things of that nature, where they receive better treatment. And so there were some British sailors that were actually on American ships because of this, because commercial ships, they need sailors too, and there's somebody here that's willing to, and they hire them, and so some British sailors do end up on commercial ships. What the British would then do is they would stop American ships, and if they'd command them to stop. If you don't stop, then they'd fire on you. And once commercial ships are not prepared to deal with the Royal Navy, and so they would stop in many cases if they couldn't outrun the ship. And so then they would be prepared to be boarded. They'd be boarded, and they would take off some of these off of these American ships. They'd take off some of the sailors, and they would say, "You're a British subject, and we're taking you." Now, in some cases, that is correct. They would be getting actually British sailors. In many cases, though, these were just Americans, and we think of, well, how would they know? Well, they wouldn't always know. There's some cases where, sailors, these British sailors, they tattooed themselves with eagles and American flags, trying to prove they were American. And you might think, well, their voices, their accents would be different. Well, there may have been some differences, but it's not the same kinds of differences we would expect today as there would have back then. So the differences might be a little more difficult to tell and pick up on. But the line is really crossed when the USS Chesapeake, so an American naval vessel, is attacked and boarded by a British Navy ship, by the Royal Navy. And there were several, I think 3 or 4 sailors killed, 16 or 17 or so are wounded, and news of this event it spreads, and Americans are outraged by this treatment. They're attacking our own Navy and taking sailors off, and it's an act of war in most cases. How will we respond? Well, Jefferson's response is actually not military mobilization. It's actually a commercial war. Now, he does actually hope to also mobilize American forces at this time. The Congress refuses. He actually wants to call up like 30,000 soldiers. Congress refuses to do that. But he, at the same time, is wanting to pass the Embargo Act. And this makes all trade with all foreign nations illegal, not simply with Britain, not simply with France, but with all countries. All trade is illegal. You cannot have a commercial American ship, is not allowed to leave American ports unless they are headed to another American port. And then you had to put up a lot of money, basically as to say, yes, we promise we are going to this other port. And if they find out that you go to a different port, well, that bond is null and void, and the American government would keep that bond. The results of this Embargo Act, stopping all trade with all countries, is a financial disaster for the entire nation, especially for New England, but really the entire country. In the South, they're used to trading with Europe. They're used to trade. It hurts every aspect of the economy, but especially in New England. And this actually has one time when we have an increase in Federalist support now, whereas the Federalist Party had been hurt by the divisions in the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party actually starts to grow during this time. One benefit really of the Embargo Act is we start to see American industry develop, because we can't get our manufactured goods from Britain or anybody else like we have been, and so we do start to see a growth in the American industry, and it's going to continue, as a matter of fact, once we start the War of 1812. And so our response to the capturing of our ships, the first response is the Embargo Act. It's a failure, and it's repealed 15 months later, just before Jefferson leaves office. He repeals it, and they pass other laws saying, well, we just won't trade with Britain or France, and problems still continue, which is going to eventually lead us to the War of 1812 with Great Britain. So this is one of the big steps towards the War of 1812.